Hey everyone, welcome to my first video on the channel. For those of you who know me from my blog, you will likely find the content I'm going to be posting here familiar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rob, and I've been a comic collector for 40 plus years, and have been a collector-dealer hybrid since the mid-80s. For some internet context, I started posting on the CGC forum in 2003, and have written about comics on my blog, It's All Just Comics, since 2005. One of the big projects I did there was the $100,000 Club, a running list of comics that would sell for over $100,000. That number is now beaten by books from the 1980s, but at the time I started doing it, it was a crazy hard number to crack. When I first published the list, it was maybe 50 books? 40? Nowadays, 8 to 10 books can crack $100,000 in a single auction. For those of you keeping track, and there are some of you, I'm going to try to catch up with the backlog of books on those lists over the next few months. I'm going to start with an update on the world record comic book sales list, which is sadly out of date because the world record has been broken. So I'll be gathering up the $1 million sales and publishing a new version of that list and the associated visualization. I'll also be updating the prose article about the world's most valuable comics, which includes books that haven't actually sold, but that's going to take a little bit of work. I may just actually discuss that here as I work my way through it. Might be fun. You can actually see, how my thought process goes on that. So we'll see. But the channel. Basically, I'll be talking about interesting collectible comic books and comic art in the same way I've traditionally written about it. Auction previews, commentary on auction results, speculation on interesting books coming up for auction, and commentary and a little bit of show and tell based on what I'm buying and collecting and some of those sort of things. I did sell mostly everything. At one point, I had over 1,000 CGC books. I was one of the highest number of CGC books on the CGC registry, and it became overwhelming, and things change and whatever. And so I sold a bunch, but I'm starting to look at some other things that I'm interested in buying, and some of them are comics related. So I'll definitely be sharing that stuff as I get it. But to start with the content here, I'm gonna look at the September 2024 Heritage Signature Auction. Heritage continues to source incredible material for their auctions, and while this auction is lacking a top Golden Age key, like a high-grade Action 1, it still has a number of books I absolutely adore, including one of the craziest Silver Age books I've ever seen. So, let's get started. Fantastic Four #1, CGC 9.6. What a book. As I look back on my time in this hobby, I have many memories that stand out. Some of them are memorable because of the people involved or the circumstances surrounding some event. I remember Todd McFarlane showing up right around the time Spider-Man #1 came out, signing books at a Boston hotel convention with 1,000 people snaking through the building. They had to rent a second room and bring him into that so the rest of us could sell comics. Other memories are purely down to being in the presence of absolutely incredible artifacts. This book reminds me of one such moment. It was at Wizard World Philly 20 or so years ago, where Doug Schmel of Pedigree Comics brought his Fantastic Four #1 CGC 9.6 to the dinner to show off. We used to have CGC forum dinners at all the big shows. People still may do it, but I don't go to shows anymore, so I don't know. It was pretty crazy. I have a photo, I'll show you quickly, of me holding that book. You could see, it's a terrible photo, but you can see how stunned I am, because I was stunned. Fantastic Four #1 is my favorite Marvel book. I know, if you know me, that's kind of funny, because was a big Daredevil collector. Still love Daredevil, but I love Fantastic Four #1. And being able to handle a book of that high quality was just a joy. This isn't that copy, by the way. Doug's copy went to Tom Berlato, Marvel Collector Extraordinaire, in a cash trade deal for Tom's CGC 9.4 Fantastic Four #1, and then cash. They valued the Fantastic Four #1 CGC 9.6, and this was 2008. They valued it at $450,000, which is interestingly, like what I had it valued at the time. So I felt pretty good about my numbers. This copy will sell for a little bit more than that. This book, by the way, showed up in the census in December 2012. That update. I looked at my blog and I'm surprised I didn't write about it. I may have to dig through the CGC forum to see what I said, just because, you know, it's probably interesting. I probably got really excited. So, pretty exciting. This is going to sell for more than $450,000. It's tied for the best copy of the most important Silver Age Marvel. I love Amazing Fantasy 15, but this is where the Marvel Age of comics started. So, yeah, very exciting. I'm going to be tuning into the live auction for this one because hopefully it'll be one of those ones that takes like a half an hour and the auctioneer's exhausted by the end and the people in the room cheer and clap and whatever. So, so that'd be fun. So, looking forward to it. Next up, we've got Amazing Fantasy 15 Curator Pedigree CGC Very Fine Near Mint 9.0. I've owned a bunch of Curator copies over the years, and they are exceptionally nice books. This one is no exception. If I were in the market for a high-grade Amazing Fantasy 15, I'd go for this book, since it's a pedigree copy, and the pedigree it's from is renowned for the quality of the books. Plus, it'll save you millions of dollars versus a 9.6. So, there's that too. Interestingly, this book has sold 4 times that I know of since 2002, selling for $35,650 in 2002 at Heritage, $60,000 in 2007. I'm not sure where, so I'd have to research where I got that number from. Sometimes I get numbers like that from Overstreet and they don't list the sales venue. Sometimes it's like Comic Link and their links broke at some point. I don't know, whatever. I'm not sure where it's sold, but it's in GPA, so and I'm not the only one who has that number. And in fact, because it's GPA, it could be a private sale. So, but $60,000 in 2007, which is not a bad buy. Then $395,000 at Comic Connect in 2017. And then finally at Comic Link in 2021, it sold for $566,000. So it's gone on a journey. Heritage, Comic Connect, Comic Link, back to Heritage. It's interesting though. Some books like this get bought up and then sit in collections for decades. You know, books just disappear. I talked about Berlato. Berlato's books just disappear. He buys them and then you never see them again. You know, Dave Anderson's books. They don't come up for sale. He keeps them. Other people are, you know, mercurial and they flip books or they're trying to upgrade or whatever. And this is one of them, in which, you know, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing. But it is a book that you can keep track of because it is a high-profile pedigree. So, like I said, I think this one is going to, you know, be a really good copy for somebody because these curated books are just beautiful. So I had a bunch in my Daredevil collection and I love them. So this one is probably the best 9. I don't know. I haven't seen all the 9.0s, but I like this one. Next up, we've got John Buscema's Wolverine #1 original cover art from the Marvel ongoing series published in 1988. You know, I've never been as connected with the world of original art as I am with funny books proper. I know comics better. I know the people that are big in comics better, many of them personally, or at least online. I have some connections and some knowledge about original art, but for the most part, you know, I look at this stuff as a fan. You know, I react to covers like this based on my own status as a lifelong fan. You know, that can be based on history, nostalgia, the artist, or just the quality of the image. So for someone who was 16 at the time of this book's release, working at Superhero Universe in downtown Boston, the nostalgia factor with this book is high, very high. It's also just a great, iconic image. This is definitely someone's grail, and, you know, could be one of those pages that surprises people, because it might be 2 people's grail, and they could go head-to-head for 45 minutes bidding each other up through the ceiling. So, we'll see. But for me, it definitely brings back some memories of being a young comic collector working at my first shop. So next up, we've got Frank Miller and Bob McLeod's cover art to Captain America 241, featuring a classic image of the Punisher. When I started working at a comic shop around this kind of mid 80s time period, and working as a dealer almost immediately, at the same time, this is one of the hottest books in the world. Miller was the top artist in American comics thanks to Daredevil and The Dark Knight Returns, and Punisher was one of the hottest characters as his 1986 miniseries was selling like hotcakes. With all that and this iconic cover image, Captain America 241 was definitely a comic to covet. So for me, this one is nostalgia, artist, and the quality of the image all wrapped up into one. What a classic. As an aside, while it's not the typical Miller-Janson style of finishing, I love Bob McLeod's inks over Miller on this cover. It's different than what you would expect from Miller, but it's still great in its own way. Here we've got John Romita Jr. and Al Williamson's Daredevil 278 cover original art. This is from 1990. That's the Al Williamson of EC Comics fame. It was crazy because, if you don't know who Al Williamson is and you just started reading comics in the 80s, you'd be like, wow, that guy's a really interesting inker. And then somebody could tell you that he was one of the most important artists of the 50s, and you'd go, what? And yes, he was. So he's a direct line back to Frank Frazetta. So Frank Frazetta's comic work. So you got to give it up for him. Anyway, I loved this run. John Romita Jr., Al Williamson, and Nocenti. It was several years of this title. I mean, maybe 5 years. And they were properly gritty stories. Obviously the Typhoid Mary character is the highlight of the run, but the whole run was great. I put it fourth behind Miller's first run, Miller and Dave Mazzucchelli, and the Bendis Malayev run in Daredevil Volume 2 in my hierarchy of Daredevil runs. I think it was great. And this cover is a good example of like a lot of what they were about. So it's gritty and it's dynamic, and the inking is kind of harsh and nutty and really vibrant. And it's also, Daredevil up against somebody who's well outside of his league, but Innocenti really had this idea about kind of his innate power and his innate just grit. And so I love it. So he's got no right trying to punch Blackheart in the face or whatever he's trying to do, but he's trying to do it anyway. 270, by the way, Daredevil 270, the first appearance of Blackheart, sells for a decent chunk of change in 9.8. I remember finding that out and just, because I was in the middle of trying to grade out a run from 1 to 283, and so I would just buy boxes of the books from the 80s and early 90s and grade them myself because it was easier than waiting for somebody else to do it over 10 years. And when I found out that this book sold for a premium, I was like, oh, I've got like 5 of those. So I had a few copies available to be graded and made a chunk of change on them, which was funny. It's one of those funny things that comes out of just like collecting for collecting's sake, and as a byproduct of that, sometimes you walk into something and look like a genius. I wasn't a genius. I was just lucky. So it was a great cover, though. I'm looking forward to seeing where this one ends up. Next up, we've got Batman 251 CGC 9.8. This is the Massachusetts copy pedigree. I remember being at a small show, one of the hotel shows in Boston, same hotel that I mentioned with that Todd McFarlane anecdote. This is more than 20 years ago, and right at the beginning of the CGC era. And Bashar Malouf, who found this pedigree, he had a box of raw mass copies. All of them were listed at like 4 to 5 times guide. It was lesser titles, Strange Adventures or whatever. But they were all 4 to 5 times guide, which is basically what near mint-ish copies would have sold for if they were CGC graded. At the time, it was tempting since some of those titles, like Strange Adventures, were ones I collected, but I passed because it just felt like way too much money for raw books. we were already thinking of things in that way. People trying to get a CGC premium for raw books, right? But was that a mistake? Did I make the wrong choice? Should I have blown my budget that day on these books? Yeah, probably. I mean, sometimes it pays to overpay. The Mile High Action 1 is the greatest example of that, but, because everyone thought, Dave was crazy. But even at a small scale, sometimes it's just worth it to pay for quality. So, it wouldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years that I would have gotten back maybe a multiple of what I'd paid if those books had graded out at 9.6 or 9.8, which is possible because while Mass isn't as deep into the Silver Age as some of the other, the early keys, the books are extremely high quality in the era that it covers. So, who knows what they could have gotten. So, and this specific book, I mean, this is a killer copy of a classic Bronze Age Joker cover. What's not to love? So, high on my list of DC covers from the 70s, in case you were keeping track. The final book I'm going to talk about today is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, CGC 9.8. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this book, as I talked in my intro about books from the 1980s that sell over $100,000. I remember the first time a copy of this book got close. It was in 2019, and I wrote the following. I'm a fan of this book, and have been since I was 12, and thought it was crazy because, at the time, a new book was selling for $100. So this is not a get off my lawn post from a guy that, recently at least, is spending most of his comic money on Golden Age DCs. I think this is great. Crazy, but great. That said, when a Copper Age book tickles up against joining the $100,000 club, that's something to write about. So aside from the eye-popping baseline number, it's important to note that this copy of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 sold for more than twice the previous GPA record of $38,000 set at Heritage in 2018, May of 2018. It's a big, crazy, headline-grabbing price increase. So, when a copy again doubled that price and sold for $245,000 at Comic Connect in 2021, I wrote the following. Well, I titled it the following. Comic Connect sells Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 CGC 9.8 for $245,000, and I just fainted. So, look at it. It had doubled between 2018 and 2019. Between 2019 and 2021, it had more than doubled. So it went from $90,000 to $245,000, and then eventually $250,000. So it's a pretty precipitous climb. And if you've been around collectible hobbies, you know that, that's maybe not sustainable. And in this case, it wasn't. Prices for the book have since cratered. The last sale brought in $87,000. So we've come full circle from that initial $90,000 sale to now $87,000. Which, if you bought at $250,000, I'm hoping you were spending Bitcoin money or whatever, because, you're going to you have to wait a little bit for that to come back. But, at the end of the day, this is a great comic. Whatever it's selling for and whatever irrational exuberance we may have seen, it was a great comic. The indie boom, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pop culture icons that they are, all, tie back to this book. The success of this book when it came out is just impossible to underestimate, right? Like, it's an iconic comic. And so, it should be celebrated, whatever it's selling for. But it is interesting to see, like, sometimes these books just go crazy and then they drop off. Another example that I always like to mention is, and this is good if you actually did buy, if you're the guy that bought this at $250,000, remember that people bought copies of Amazing Spider-Man #14 for like $20,000 in, 9.4 for $20,000 in whatever it was when that Spider-Man movie came out, 2004 or whatever. Doesn't matter. And then after the movie came out and the hype died down, that book was selling for like $8,000. And of course now it's like you have a first appearance of Green Goblin in CGC 9.4, you're doing pretty well for yourself. But, there's often a pullback, but for really high quality material, sometimes you do get back to that, those high points and surpass them, right? So again, buy stuff you like, and most of the time you'll do okay. Maybe I don't know. Hopefully, if so, that's it for this first video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like and subscribe and share with your friends. I'm hoping to expand the content here to include some interviews with some of the people I've met over the years, and it'll be a lot easier to convince them to talk to me on camera if I can convince them that there will be an audience. So, let's make an audience. For my part, this was a lot of fun to do, and I'm looking forward to the next one, which will be about the next Comic Connect event auction. Thanks.